Jack took a sigh of relief. He scratched his head, which was beginning to ache from the cries. It was nothing he hadn't heard before, though hearing so many in one place and having them echo through his head caused more discomfort than he had originally hoped. He hadn't yet taken in the atmosphere of the surrounding area before the sound of a knife being sharpened broke his trail of thought. He found himself in a locked-on focus with a woman who looked to be about double his age at least, wearing a white vest that happened to be splattered with a familiar red substance that needed no introduction to him. It matched his own white t-shirt that he happened to be wearing, with the only difference being her stains having a slight glimmer, indicating that they were recently created.
What do you want?
It took him a moment to snap back to a stable state of mind. Yeah, have you got any medical supplies? I'm heading up north and I'm running a little short, he asked, instantly regretting that he mentioned the direction of which he was heading. She stopped sharpening the knife, which still had bloodstains covering the end. She casually threw it on the floor out of sight into a dark corner. She lifted a silver tray from under the counter she was positioned at. A rattle of stray and foreign equipment was accompanied by a slam as she placed it on the countertop. Jack observed the tray. Needles stuck out, making it look like a very painful bird's nest. He noticed that it contained the Stimpaks and Med-X. These were medicines that would be useful after a fight, with both of them being able to heal injuries much faster than most medical supplies. They would have been a goldmine if he had the caps to spare. These aren't exactly what I'm looking for, he stated.
Then why are you bothering me?
No, I mean I'm looking for something more along the lines of Stealth Boys and Jet. The clinic let out an aggressive sigh. She reached under the counter and pulled out another tray and placed it beside the other one. It showed several inhalers which Jack recognized as Jet. He wasn't interested in buying any of it, but once the opportunity arose he became tempted. The substance was highly addictive, but it boosted reaction time and gave a slight burst of adrenaline, but as a con it reduced these reactions once it had worn off. In the center of the tray he saw a metallic shiny device, much larger than anything else. This was the Stealth Boy Sarah must have been talking about. It had a few bumps here and there and it looked like it had been through a lot. Jack had never used one, but assumed that this wasn't its original appearance. He reached over. May I? He asked, intending to examine it.
Money first, then you'll get the goods.
Jack instantly retracted his hand upon reaction. There was no guarantee of the Stealth Boy working, and they were mainly built for a one-time use, though some people with a bit of knowledge and know-how could be capable of extending their lifespan. He, however, was not one of these people. I'm thinking 40 caps for the Stealth Boy. It's broken and tattered, that's all I've got on me, he offered, raising the pouch from his back pocket. It's yours if you want it. He dropped it to the counter as it made the unforgettable sound of metal bottle caps ringing upon impact. The clinic took a second to think. She stood with her arms crossed looking at the caps. She rolled her eyes and gave a nod as she handed him the device.
You need anything else?
Not unless you're handing out freebies. No, I think I'm good, he said, holding the Stealth Boy in his hands, wondering if he had just made a mistake. Sarah, on her behalf, was busy in her own little world, sat cross-legged and drawing random scribbles in the dirt. There was no particular pattern to her work, but it kept her entertained in such a small enclosure. She kept an ear out for any sounds which could indicate Jack's return. A simple turn of her head would have also been efficient, but that would interrupt her drawing. The sound of footsteps was evident, though they were quiet. It was a clear sign that Jack was approaching. Tiptoeing around the guards with his careful footsteps and consistent pace actually made him stand out more, even though she couldn't see him visually. It was the kind of way you would expect a family dog or a young child who had done something wrong to go tiptoeing around the adults to avoid suspicion, and yet draw suspicion just from doing so. The thought did little to distract her attention, but distraction became unavoidable when there was a loud thud sound as a rusty metallic device landed in front of her, kicking up a cloud of dry dirt. She waved it out her face as she placed it onto her lap and looked around to see if it had attracted any attention. No sign of any yet. "Any time today would be great, Sarah," a familiar and yet annoying voice to her growled. She didn't respond and instead brushed off the pile of dirt where she had her legs crossed over to reveal a very small piece of barbed wire. Guards often used too much and would leave the remaining wire on the floor in the pens. "Did you not hear me? The gates are about to close," the voice said again.
Oh yeah, I made that up.
She responded without lifting her head.
Is this the best one she had? I thought she'd have one.
"Yeah, 40 caps well spent, that's what you get." "Wait. You were the one to have it confiscated?"
Doesn't exactly matter whose it was. Where'd you say you were heading after this?
She asked as she wrapped the barbed wire around her hands, making it look almost like a pair of makeshift brass knuckles. "That doesn't matter either. What matters is where you're taking me."
Whatever. I need to get out of here alone, so I'll meet you at the front gate.
Jack stepped back as he took a large breath through his clenched teeth. He rubbed his hand down his face. "Okay, I'll wait for you outside. I'm giving you 5 minutes, so don't fuck about."
Oh, and I'm going to need your fancy watch.
Jack was taking his leave when he heard her say this. He paused. He turned his head, but his body remained facing away. "Fuck off."
You not see this thing? It can't run on its own power. Your Pip-Boy has an adapter that can charge it while it's in use.
He looked puzzled. What she was saying was indeed true, but how could a raider like her possibly have knowledge on Vault-Tec gear? He was pinned between a rock and a hard place. He didn't have any reason to trust her, but what other choice did he have? He loosened the device and held it out in front of himself. His left arm was a bright pale colour, the kind of pale you would expect from a sickly child. The screen displayed a cartoon boy holding a thumbs up towards him, smiling. It then shut down as all the blinking lights did also. This was a sign that the device recognised that it was no longer in use. "I need this back," he sighed as he was about to make a threat before realising that nothing he had said so far had sunk in. He casually threw it over the fence as Sarah caught it while she was still sat cross-legged. He went on his way as Sarah was left to examine his Pip-Boy. She slid it onto her right arm. It felt heavy, a weight that she would not be comfortable to carry around all day every day. She then continued to examine the Stealth Boy. It was in rough condition, but she figured she could get it to work with some tender love and care. She flicked a few buttons as the device emitted a quiet electrical buzz, followed by a light vibration. She pulled a wire from the Pip-Boy and flicked off the panel to the Stealth Boy in order to attach it. With this, the buzzing stopped, and she used the strap that came with it to attach it around the Pip-Boy. With a couple more presses, the device began to fade on her arm. She wondered if this was some kind of malfunction. Stealth Boys were designed to render the user almost completely invisible, though if one had a glitch, it could fade without taking the host with it. This thought was interrupted as she noticed that her arm too was fading away. She noticed a strand of hair in front of her face that also appeared to lose most of its visibility. However, it still created a slight shimmer if she waved it about. She looked down at her feet. They too seemed to vanish before her eyes. Even her clothes and shoes became transparent, but again she noticed shimmers whenever she moved. She would have to be careful and stick to the shadows if she was to remain undetected. With a light push, Sarah opened the gate. It made a squeaking sound as it did, although it wasn't loud enough to be heard by anyone other than her. The direction was pretty straightforward, literally in her case. She was at the very back of the settlement, with the only exit being in the direction she was heading. Most slaves were kept at the back, which prevented them from escaping through the gate, and the collars around their neck made sure that they made no attempt in trying to get out any other way. When more slaves were recruited, they had to expand the cages to around Paradise Falls. The official guard of the slaves always had his back turned on them, not because of any hatred or disgust in them, but because of what was going on in the centre of the town was far more interesting than their cries and moans. It just so happened that he was her first target. Not much of a challenge so long as she dealt with him silently. Sarah gripped the barbed wire she had in her hand and pulled it tight as it stretched from one hand to the other. When she was sure she had the right moment, she threw the wire over his head and dug it into his neck. As she did this, she pulled him back violently so that he would remain out of sight from the other slavers. She didn't care if the slaves themselves saw. She fell to the ground as she pulled him down with her. She was either going to suffocate him by strangulation or drown him in his own blood. If the wire was able to cut deep enough, either one was good enough for her. He didn't put up much of a fight. Instead, all his attention was focused on trying to get the wire out of his neck. He failed to do so as it had embedded itself deep as the sharp blades dug deeper. It didn't take long for the constant struggle to come to a full stop, and the sounds of him trying to breathe were now replaced by a gurgling sound. Sarah took this as a sign that the wire had reached his windpipe, and he was now drowning in his own blood. His body became limp as Sarah pushed him off to notice that her t-shirt had now become damp and soggy. She must have gotten a bit ahead of herself when deciding on how to kill him. She looked over and saw the wire buried about halfway into his neck. From her point of view, she considered him lucky that his head was still attached at all. Unlike most people, Sarah wasn't put off by the sight of blood in the wasteland, though she found it annoying that it had made her clothes stick to her body, which made it more difficult to maneuver stealthily around the settlement. She gave him a quick look over as she swiped a knife and a small pouch which made a metallic sound as she picked it up. She would have taken the time to search him more, but her time was limited. So long as she had some sort of weapon, she'd feel a lot better. She went to examine it, though it vanished with her touch. She blew a strand of hair out of her face as she continued on. The centre of Paradise Falls was busy with slavers arguing and drug taking. Crossing the centre would be no easy task, with or without a stealth boy. What she needed was some kind of distraction. Something subtle wouldn't be enough in this case. She needed a way to attract all attention into a single place. She observed a slaver standing with his back towards some more cages, just out of reach from the slaves themselves. She took this moment and passed by behind him, swiping something as she did. As she did this, she picked up the pace, backing up against the wall with the gate line just beyond. She began counting down under her breath.
3, 2, 1.
Jack had taken the time to relax against the rusty remains of a pre-war vehicle positioned just outside the settlement. He lifted his arm to check the time on his Pip-Boy, only to be greeted by a very pale patch of skin where the light hadn't seen in a very long time. As each second passed, his face seemed to grow in anger. "Oh, and I'm gonna need your fancy wristwatch. Why the fuck did I listen to her?" His head was suddenly drawn to Paradise Falls as he saw dust and smoke in the sky. His eyes widened as he got to his feet. He paused for a moment, trying to figure out what to do next. He looked north towards where he was heading, and then back at Paradise. He turned again and thought about his available options. He wasn't going to starve anytime soon, but he wouldn't last long if he ran into trouble. His thought was cut off when he heard light footsteps behind him, the kind you would only notice if you were expecting them. "What happened in there?" he asked as he turned to face nothing. As if on cue, Sarah faded into sight. "I said 5 minutes!"
Whatever, who's counting?
She argued as she jingled a couple of pieces of metal in her hand. She seemed to be covered in the infamous red liquid as some dripped from her hands. Jack was about to ask about it when suddenly 2 more explosions sounded. It became obvious that in her hand were the pins of grenades. "Is that why you're covered in blood?"
Oh, that? I didn't realize. But hey, I got you these.
She said as she pulled a damp pouch of bottle caps from her back pocket and threw them over. Jack caught them as his hand became damp and sticky with the red substance. "Oh, and I'll have that Pip-Boy back too. You're wearing it on the wrong arm, by the way."
You sure do love this thing. It's too heavy for me anyway.
Alright, come on, let's get out of here before they realise you're gone. Oh, and if you get any bright ideas about running off, it won't end well for you.
Oh, you're so cute when you're angry. Come on, we should be there by midnight.